Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to Clear Mountains podcast, or first live stream on Buddhist Insights and our YouTube channel. I'm Nisabho and Ajahn.
I am Ajahn Kovilo.
Um, and yeah, just to say hello to Karina, Adine, hello Sujata, Carson, Catherine, Jens. It's good to see everyone. We are streaming to both our YouTube channel for Clear Mountain, but also to Buddhist Insights. Ayasoma and Bhante Sudaso have really kindly, we've struck up a friendship with them, and they've really kindly let us stream to their Facebook and YouTube as well. So we want to say hello to that whole community and just acknowledge our gratitude for letting us kind of tap into that whole community there, because it's a really lovely group. I was there for the last few weeks and it was really a good experience. Yeah, and a really nice community online. So today we wanted to, Ajahn Kovilo had the great idea of speaking about the big five personality traits with regards to Buddhist practice. But after we speak for a bit, we wanted to really open things up as well to general questions and answers and discussions. So if people want to paste questions into the chat as we go, then they're most welcome to, and we'll touch on that stuff later. Just for a bit of introduction, Clear Mountain Monastery is the project which Ajahn Kovilo and I are looking to begin in the Seattle area, a monastery in the Thai forest tradition. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we have a website, clearmountainmonastery.org, as well as a Facebook and YouTube channel. So I don't know, Ajahn Kovilo, anything to add, or would you like to go into talking a bit about the big five personality traits and introducing those?
Yeah, no, I don't have much else to add. I think it is good to note that there is a lag. So this is the first time we've done this. So we'll be trying to work out some of these technical difficulties. But yeah, it seems like things are working well enough. And yeah, these big five personality traits are something which I've been looking at, exploring, and seeing how they relate to my own practice. And I think it's a kind of a fascinating framework. Personality in general is a realm of practice of life, which yeah, you don't always hear spoken about. I mean, there's not, the perhaps the closest equivalent in the Pali language is Sakaya Ditti, which is personality view, which is clearly seen as a fetter. But I think there are certain aspects of our characters and our personalities which are not necessarily fetters. Like there's a whole genre of stories about arhats, who have different personalities. You've got Longtan Mahabua, who's a very strong personality. He was a boxer before he ordained, and yeah, he's a very fiery temperament. Where you have somebody like Lumpu Wan, who is yeah, just so soft, so tender. So those are, monks living in Thailand last century, but similarly, you've got different personalities of the great disciples of Buddha. So yeah, just to introduce this big five personality classification system, it was developed in the 1980s, and it is five different spectrum or five different ranges of personality dynamics. So the acronym to remember this is OCEAN, 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 and that stands for the first, though, the first spectrum is openness to experience. And this is the spectrum which contains openness on the one side and closedness on the other side. And what that means is, say, generally speaking, you have liberals on the open end of the spectrum and conservatives on the closed end of the spectrum. And it's good to note at the outset that when this system was devised, 4 out of 5 characteristics have no value judgment to them. There's no, inherent kind of bias that, openness is better than closedness, etc. And this is the case for 4 out of the 5. And the only one that doesn't apply to is the 5th, which we'll get to. But the next quality, the C, is conscientiousness. So this is the spectrum which contains, one's kind of adherence and appreciation of ritual, of rules, liking specificity, versus on the other end, appreciating, just more fluidity in terms of, perhaps less commitment to duty, less commitment to being orderly in one's daily life. You don't really care about your room being so clean. That's the conscientiousness spectrum. And so, Nisabho, feel free to jump in. It might take you a second.
Keep going. I think this rundown is really helpful. I'll chime in afterwards. Keep going, Ajahn.
Okay. Next, the A is agreeableness. So this is, you have people who are very agreeable, and that type of person, or this dynamic of personality, has to do with one's sense of I'm sorry, I skipped the E, so I was misspelling ocean. So
extroversion.
Got extroversion, exactly. So extroversion on one side, and introversion on the other. The extrovert is cheerful, assertive, friendly. They seek excitement. They like activity, and they're gregarious. Whereas you have the introverts who, appreciate solitude. They get energy being by themselves. That's one way to distinguish these two. Extroverts get energy in groups with being with other people, and introverts gain energy when they're with themselves, and they lose energy, they drain energy when they're with others. Whereas extroverts gain energy with others and lose energy to some extent when they're by themselves. The next quality, if people can spell ocean, is agreeableness. And that agreeableness, that side of the spectrum is, when you have, modesty, altruism, morality, feelings of sympathy and trust and cooperation on the agreeable side. And the disagreeable side are, people who are more of a critical bent, who, maybe value, speaking directly, saying things as they are, a adherence to truth as they see it is more important than the lubricant of social, in Thai there's a word nam chai, which is like the water of the heart, or like the social alum aloy, the social kind of give and take of interactions, which you get on the agreeable end of the spectrum. And final characteristic, or the final N of ocean, is neuroticism. And this is the one characteristic which the original creators of this 5-part framework, did give a value judgment to. It's a healthier individual who is less neurotic, who's on the healthier end of that spectrum. Neuroticism is the whole, it's an umbrella term for all sorts of psychological imbalance, such as immoderateness, vulnerability, self-consciousness, anger, anxiety, and depression. So that's the big 5. And what I think will be really fascinating to talk about is, are these neutral characteristics in the Buddhist framework, or does the Buddha give precedence to various sides of these different continua? You have any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for that rundown, Ajahn. It's good for me to review too. And Ajahn Kovilo just suggested this topic recently, and I hadn't looked into the Big 5 much, but I was reading up on them, and what you point out in terms of the fact that the suttas don't explicitly go into them, that's interesting. You're right. Like, people aren't parsed out in quite these ways. The Buddha mostly seems to point towards qualities. yeah, they're more parsed out in these wholesome and unwholesome, and particularly pointing to the unwholesome, um, the things you're letting go of almost. And it's just a different framework, but it strikes me that one of the places where you really do see these personality types illustrated in the suttas is, strangely enough, sort of hidden in the figures of the great disciples. It's like, so you do have each of these represented in different measure, but instead of being explicitly described in terms of, these abstract terms, what you do find is sort of like the patron saints in Catholicism. You have, these wide variety of great disciples really, um, sort of highlighted by the Buddha repeatedly. There's those suttas where he points to how different elements mix together, and he sort of points out to the monk with him how, the monks who really love to study are walking with Venerable Sariputta, and those who enjoy forest dwelling are walking with Venerable Mahakassapa. And so it's almost like he's acknowledging these character types, but it's almost through these representatives, or these sort of folk, you know, loci of meaning through the great disciples. And that maybe is why they've taken on such prominence, is because they serve as repositories for this whole realm of like, where do these sort of neither good nor bad qualities fit? Um, and I think one of the most interesting dynamics in the suttas that you come across is that of Venerable Ananda and then Venerable Mahakassapa, because they're perhaps the most starkly contrasted of the two. So for those who are familiar with the suttas, you'll know Venerable Ananda is renowned for his agreeableness and his openness. He was the one who really tried to, um, he was constantly trying to sort of, say, usher people to the Buddha at times, or, some of the suttas have him advocating for uh, bhikkhunis, to various elements of the Sangha as well, whereas, and sort of a progressive general air, whereas Venerable Mahakassapa is known for his asceticism, being having quite a sharp tongue. He admonishes Venerable Nanda a lot, and it's interesting to read these because they're really in sharp contrast and very explicitly so, almost to the point of some friction in the Sangha. During the last council, I believe Venerable during those final years of the Buddha, at least, there's conflicts between the two of them, and yet both are attained. Venerable Mahakassapa is an arahant in many of these stories, and Venerable Nanda has achieved one stage of awakening, and by the first council of the Buddha, he's an arahant as well. So they both embody these almost completely opposite traits, and yet they are both pure beings. And I'd be interested to parse out exactly which traits these two embody, but they strike me as a particularly potent example of this, and also how, you do see this in the Sangha and internally, how there is this tension between personality types, and it causes friction, but that it's necessary for every institution to have this sort of push and pull. But that's where I sort of went with that thing, is Ananda being a representative of maybe openness, agreeableness, extroversion, and what's the other one, Ajahn, apart from neuroticism? Uh, and maybe, yeah, maybe Venerable Mahakassapa is more conscientious. I don't know, but um, and then maybe, and the final thing to mention is that it seems like neuroticism, I don't know if that occupies the same place as the other four in the Buddhist framework either, or if that's just the tendency towards suffering and to compound one's suffering. Like, would an arahant have any neuroticism? So, I mean, I don't even, yeah, it's interesting to contemplate. What are your thoughts, Ajahn?
That final question is a fascinating one. Would the arhants have any neuroticism? I mean, almost by definition, my my favorite and the most approachable and practice-oriented definition for nibbana, for enlightenment, for what it is that an arhat realizes that makes them a noble being, is that they're totally free from greed, anger, and delusion. And these I briefly listed out some of the sub-qualities of each of these characteristics. So for neuroticism, you've got immoderateness, vulnerability, self-consciousness, anger, anxiety, and depression. And for those ones, one would think that all of those kind of fit under the umbrellas of greed, anger, and delusion. So for someone who no longer has those, then they would be totally on the non-neurotic side of that spectrum. But in terms of where Ajahn Kassapa and Ananda, where they fit in, I think you totally nailed it. And well, in terms of conscientiousness, all of these are spectrums, and I think you're right. If you've got a middle, some kind of imagined middle ground between being open and being closed, I think that Mahakassapa would be on the more traditional, closed, less inclined towards innovation, and then Ananda is on the open end of the spectrum, inclined towards imagination, imagining what the Sangha would look like if bhikkhunis could join, maybe a sense of adventure to some extent. But that said, it's not clear. I mean, Mahakassapa lived an extremely adventuresome life, which is an openness characteristic. I mean, he's foremost in ascetic practices, foremost in he chose to live with extremely minimal requisites and in the forest, up until his old age, basically until he passes away. So lived an adventuresome life.
May I, Ajahn? It's you bring up a really good point in that
Please.
There seems to be this paradox. I mean, I agree with you on the neuroticism thing. Although it's interesting, I do know monks who it's almost like they have a slightly neurotic personality still, but it's held within a wider and wider equanimity. It's interesting. And it's sort of like they're aware of it, so it doesn't lead to any compounding unwholesomeness, but there's still a sort of tendency towards worry, but it's sort of held with a good humor. I don't know quite how that fits in, but I would agree with you with those sub-definitions of neuroticism. It seems like that would be something completely absent from an enlightened being and certainly attenuated. And I think it's defined as negative mental states, so that would make sense. But the other thing you point out in terms of the paradox within Venerable Mahakassapa and within each of us is one of the really interesting things I was reflecting on in terms of Buddhist practice, because these big five are conditioned partly by one's character at birth, but also largely by one's development and upbringing. And they're supposed to have crystallized when you grow to a certain age, but I think that Buddhist practice can change them significantly, actually. And, in Buddhism, we have this term sankhara, which is variously translated as formation or program. It's these sort of ways we act naturally that are sort of embedded and crystallized over time. It's our ways of, the way you interact when you enter a party. Are you the center of attention? Do you seek that naturally? Do you fall into it easily? And what I've seen in myself, and especially in the great beings that I've met, is that as one practices, you gain the ability to step back from those sankhara more and more. And what I've seen really amazing teachers do is turn on a dime. And Ajahn Chah was known for this. He would be smiling and laughing with, say, the Westerners, because we were all, the Westerners tend to be serious and fairly neurotic and, could use a good dose of Ajahn Chah metta. But then, he would come across a careless monk who was let his robe down and just become unbelievably fierce. And then there's a story of one monk massaging Ajahn Chah while he was switching back and forth or admonishing another monk. And this monk, I think, was it Longpo Pasano, Ajahn Kovilo? Do you remember the monk who was massaging Ajahn Chah during this? Who detected no tension in him while he was doing that? There's a story. This monk was sort of massaging Ajahn Chah, and he was just admonishing a monk, but there was no tension in his body. And then he switched on a dime. And it's almost like the enlightened beings gain this ability to just use Sankara and bring it up and these different personality traits, and they can embody two sides of one quality very whatever's skillful, and they have the ability to sort of jump back and forth. And also it's the paradox of Dhamma practice for me in terms of, because you are, I think we all need this sense of sort of security and being held. Like all of these personality traits have sort of interplay between order and chaos, you know, openness versus non-openness, say extroversion, which is very open to everything around you, versus introversion, which is a bit more on the order side. And it's almost like because our practice allows us this sort of firm pillar of stability and security in terms of our meditation, then you gain the ability to actually, when you need to become extroverted, you can really just step into that role even more so. I found that's true. After I meditate, I can really engage with people and be very open, because it's almost like the introverted part of myself has been fed, or I have a foundation of stability, so I can step into these more open roles. And finally, I just think it's interesting, say in our tradition, people can look at it and see too much orderliness. You know, we have all these rituals and various costumes and such. But in reality, what I found is because we have this container of all these rituals and rules, the Vinaya, what it actually allows is for a great amount of spaciousness in terms of how we practice. And whereas many, say, meditation lineages, you have to be practicing a specific technique because that's what defines the lineage. Because our lineage and that of the monastic form is defined by all these other things, it is actually allowed a lot more openness in terms of meditation techniques. So if people come to, say, a monastery in the Thai forest tradition, they're allowed to practice almost any meditation technique they want because we're held by something else. So all to say that there seems to be a need for both sides of most of these qualities, but that it seems like Dhamma Vinaya represents, like, because we have this order sort of built in, we can step into these open roles more freely. That was a long and rambling reflection, but what are your thoughts, Ajahn?
Yeah, no, some very interesting reflections, and yeah, just the ability of well-trained practitioners, or really just mature people. I mean,
Mm,
I'm sure, I think you and I both, you know, have met some pretty amazing practitioners who, might be on a whole nother level of the, nobility spectrum. But yeah, just like mature people. I mean, the people in my life who I know who are the most mature are able to do this. They might be um, naturally inclined to introversion, but in situations when they, need to be outgoing, then they can do that, and it doesn't,
mm,
you know, stress them too much. And yeah, not being attached to personality, I think is, um, yeah, we're training something deeper than our personality, and what we're training, basically training the heart, to not cling. Um,
mm,
yeah, kind of lets us have fluidity with these different spectrums, and to be able to get a better perspective of what is useful in a given situation.
mm,
You mentioned that, yeah, roughly, in social science, or the research that's been done on the Big Five, there is a general tendency that, they'll say people will concretize as, they reach a certain age, but there are general trends. So like most people will, as they get older, slightly increase or decrease on these different spectrums. So people will in general become less open as they get older, as you can easily see, you get more frail. So you want to become, tend towards more safety. People get more conscientious as they mature or as they get older. People become less extroverted, more introverted, and more agreeable and less neurotic on speaking on the large scale. But yeah, I mean, I think these are aspects that, I mean, the Buddha did, you know, he did praise being agreeable. Like there's a number of very beautiful suttas, which the Buddha is basically saying, like literally, I will be one who is easy to admonish, and I will make myself easy to admonish. That's almost like, that's a quote from the suttas, the Anangana Sutta, Majjhima number 15. But it also comes up in the simile of the saw, Majjhima number 20, I believe, 21.
21, yeah.
So yeah, that's very agreeable. But again, someone doesn't have to be stuck in that. You know, you can be very agreeable, and that makes other people around you feel more comfortable. But as you've noted with these great teachers, Ajahn Chah, they can take on the appearance of being disagreeable when that's useful. And there is utility in that, especially for a teacher. I mean, you don't want to just be the pushover all the time. Sometimes you really have to speak very clearly and pointedly about someone who's doing something that's out of line. You can do that, but in general, the Buddha did encourage us to be someone who's easy to admonish. How can I be easy to admonish and make myself easy to admonish? That's beautiful. Those are the people who I feel most comfortable talking to, who I'm not afraid if I say the wrong word, or if I bring up some topic that they're not comfortable with, that they'll have some kind of strong reaction, or you feel, and when there is that kind of mutual kind of trust, then it lets you, it makes one's social life less glass walking likeness. So
I agree with that. Yes. Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point with the mature beings being able to step back from those personality types, is that, Ajahn Sucitta says that like 80% of the practice at first is just strengthening the chitta, the mind heart. And, to step back from it's like the self needs to cling to something. And if all it has is the personality and these programs and these sankhars and these ways it knows of acting, then it will cling with a white-knuckled grip. And these things, we only will be able to act out the same programs and, ways we've had of interacting with others and with ourselves again and again. And we become machines, and life becomes completely deadened. And we lose all that ability to play and to adapt skillfully. And I think we all know people in our lives like that. You can sense the sort of crusting over. And it's really sad. I think it's why the Buddha said that, those without mindfulness are as if dead already. Because if all you are is sankhara, and that seed of chitta, of light mind heart, is hidden below layer after layer, you can barely see it anymore. Whereas with children, you can see it so clearly. And with really good practitioners, you can see it again. And that's such a beauty, because the sankharas are let go of, so this thing has a chance to shine through. And it's the great tragedy of life when it just gets covered over again and again. And I think what's interesting is that you see that for the heart to step back from these personality programs, from these sankhara, it needs to have something else to step into. It needs another resting place. And I think that's could be variously looked at as this sort of somewhat difficult to define quality of chitta, mind heart, which a lot of our teachers talk about. You could speak up vaguely around it in terms of, say, mindfulness, the quality of knowing, but also just, as you practice, you do get a sense of lightness and buoyancy, and also of an internal voice, which kind of guides you more and more. At least I do. And trusting that. And that's something much deeper than sankhara. and it's the voice of wisdom. And I think Ajahn Sumedho calls it intuitive awareness, and it lives around the heart. And Ajahn Sucitto calls it, I think, the chitta. So I think you do get it, that gets brighter and brighter as you meditate and keep good morality, and you can rest more and more in that. And so the sankhara are allowed to dissolve into that. But also, all these, what Longpa Pasano calls the props, like our robes, the Buddha image, the Sangha, the Vinaya, our code, the 5 precepts, all these are structures that hold us together that we can just rest in. And they provide a huge amount of order and comfort in our lives so that we can step back from our sankhara, because we're creating a very skillful, sort of impersonal, unbelievably wholesome sankhara in terms of, how we interact with our world, defined by, for monks, these huge number of rules, but they're very beautiful rules about how we interact. And I think, if you've been on retreat, there's this sort of schedule you keep. You eat at this time, you sit at this time. And because there's that schedule that you get to rest in, then you're allowed to kind of dissolve internally like you need to a little bit, because you have something else to rest in. Like if you're going through a great storm internally, it's so helpful to know, to not have to decide how you're going to interact with this person, or when you're going to eat, or what you're going to do today. And I think that's why retreat's an extreme example of this, but the Buddha provided so many structures for the Sangha and for lay practitioners to rest in, because it does allow us to step back from these personality programs and really let go of them a little bit. So I think that's one level, but I think, and that's the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the refuge. But I think more than that is, at a deeper level, is this chitta quality of resting more and more in that deeper knowing. At least that's what's guided me. What I don't quite know how to talk about it. Maybe it's a bit dangerous too, I suppose, but something like intuitive awareness seems to become a bit more prominent in my life, at least. Ajahn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, you say a lot of beautiful things, and the ability to play with these things. So just I think we'll probably start taking questions in just a bit, but on this topic of the big 5, these 5 personality traits, we don't want to form a new personality around any of these. Like, many people would adamantly just grasp onto this. I'm an extrovert. I'm a total extrovert. I'm always an extrovert, and that's just what I am. That's what I've always been, and etc. Or recently with this, I think it's Susan Cain wrote a wonderful book called Quiet, which I highly recommend. But after that book came out, there's kind of this rebound. All the introverts have been feeling like oppressed by all the extroverts of the world for so long, but Susan Cain writes this book, and it's almost like this introvert revolution. But then that's kind of just taking the opposite extreme. You're like taking on this new identity of I'm an extrovert. I'm an extrovert, and actually they're better than introverts. Or I'm an introvert, sorry, and they're better than extroverts. This type of thing. So yeah, being able to play and having this other space, this kind of intuitive knowing, or just the spaciousness of mind that you can call the heart, or just the knowing, which doesn't have to grasp on, and doesn't grasp onto these different very superficial things. So should we take some questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Ajahn, for that, and thanks for bringing up this topic. This was actually really fun. So yeah, hello everyone to who's joined us since then. Luciana, Acme Baby Company. Hello. Sarah, Art, Buddhistara, Dharma Wisdom, Richard, Getha, Ngana, Sawaka, Angela. I'm sorry if we're getting your names wrong, but it's good to see everyone. And for those who just joined, Ajahn Kovilo and I are monks who are from Clear Mountain. Well, we're part of the Clear Mountain Monastery Project, which is a budding monastery in Seattle, or the aspiration towards one. And Aya Soma and Bhante Sudaso of Buddhist Insights and Empty Cloud have really kindly let us tap into this whole community. So we're very grateful. And yeah, we just have a chance to take some questions now. So Ajahn, what would you like to speak to? Did you hear me, Ajahn?
I thought
Sorry.
that was a question for the audience.
Oh, no, Ajahn, what would you like? You've picked the one you want to talk about. What would you like?
Okay, let's see. I'll show this one. So this is Jin Hess. So how do the types of greed, hate, and delusion fit into these 5? Also, do you see as we practice, the Dhamma shines through over these types?
Go
So,
for it,
yeah,
Ajahn.
good question. Yeah, good question. Greed, anger, and delusion. I mean, they're all neurotic states. So you could say that neuroticism is kind of an overarching, ignorant state. But I think they can manifest in other ones, like on the disagreeable side of the agreeable disagreeable continua. Yeah, that really opens itself up for anger. Like if you're someone who really values straight talking, or values just saying things like they are, then it's really easy if you don't stay on top of your mindfulness game. Then anger can come up and co-opt your whole agenda. In terms of craving, I mean, or greed, as an introvert, I might be inclined to say that the extroverts are more prone towards greed.
That's a little harsh, Ajahn. It's true.
I know. I didn't say that I would say that.
You were looking at me.
I might say that.
Go on. Go on,
but
Ajahn.
of course, we all have different objects. We all have different objects of greed. Like introverts, I totally see it in myself. It's this serious greed, just get back to my room. Right now I'm in a Buddhist university, and pretty much, all my classes are online with Zoom, and I just go out to get the meal and to do communal meditation. And it's ridiculous how quickly I want to get back to my room. The room greed, the introvert greed there is just inappropriate. It's inappropriate. But of course, extroverts have got there. Maybe you could speak about some extroverts and greed.
I like your example better, Ajahn.
Yeah, okay.
Keep going though. You have to touch on delusion. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, maybe delusion, we can think of it as like just the overarching clingingness. Like if we cling to any of these 5, then that's delusion. Yeah. Or if we make a self out of any of these 5, then that's a deluded approach. Do you have another question you'd like to post up?
Yeah, I like this one. Thank you, Ajahn. Those were actually really good reflections. I have the room greed sometimes, but I'm the extrovert at this pair, I think. And the greed type, perhaps. Venerables, Geetha Gnana, I hope I'm saying your name right, Geetha. Venerables, is one continuously developing the 10 paramitas as one travels on this path towards Nibbana? IDK, which I believe means I don't know, we're supposed to look past self, and these categories look like a concept that people would cling to and define themselves by. Those are actually 2 separate questions. I thought they were the same one, but they are kind of interesting to pair together. In that let me see. Yes, the 10 paramitas, for the record, I don't believe they're explicitly mentioned in the suttas, but as far as I know, Ajahn Kovilo can correct me, but basically they
do occur in Buddhavamsa.
Buddhavamsa, okay. And is that how is that okay? Okay. So they but the Mahayana ended up with 6 and the Theravada ended up with 10. So there are things such as generosity, believe sila, nekama. Is sila one of them? Yes. Nekama, patience,
Yep. Yep.
energy, so on, metta, equanimity. And basically they're qualities which they spoke of, I think, explicitly around the Buddha developing in his path towards Buddhahood, but that all practitioners have to develop to some degree. So, yeah, I think that they are ones that qualities that we're taught to look towards developing, and there is a progression in them in some sense. For example, dana, giving, is the first of those paramitas, and it's a very robust foundation for practice, and it's one of the great things that seems to be, for example, lacking in the West, but that you see so clearly in Thailand. Many Westerners, we come for, say, the higher sort of these sort of wisdom teachings and meditation, but we leave off this whole thing about giving, and that can really lead to a dryness in practice, and it's a problem. And you go and live in Thailand, and you see how this quality of giving has been cultivated. You'll walk on alms round as a monk, and the streets will be lined with people. Just they'll give a little bit of their rice every morning to the monks or something every day from the age of 6 months. Their parents will be guiding their hands into the bowls, and it's deep in this culture. It's not for nothing that Thailand's known as the land of smiles. So, and then these list of 10 paramitas end with equanimity, which is in many conceptions one of these sort of very high and refined qualities. So I'd say they're all really important to cultivate, but they do have. It's interesting to pair with that second question I posted in terms of letting go of self, because both the paramitas and these personality traits, yes, at some point we do need to let go of conceptions of a self, and we need to work to hold to our old conceptions of ourself more and more lightly, and to develop new and skillful conceptions of self. This is mentioned very explicitly in the suttas, where there's a sutta called I believe it's Ananda Sutta, and he's speaking with the bhikkhuni and saying, this path is for the ending of conceit, yet we use conceit on the path and for the path. Saying like, this person attained nibbana, why can't I? And all these things around sila and morality and practice, we're using the tools we have, which are our personality structures, and we're strengthening them until they can take us to the point where we can break through completely. I like how it's put. I think Longtama Mahabua said, we, anyways, sila and samadhi is the sort of thinks in terms of self, and then wisdom thinks in terms of not self, and then enlightenment is beyond both the category of self and not self. Ajahn, what would you like to speak to next?
We got one from Chandra Sekar. Chandra Sekar. So namaste. Namaste. I should be familiar with the list of names of personalities to understand the personalities. How do you go about this? Yeah. So just for clarification, we kind of gave a bit of an introduction at the beginning. This is not a Buddhist list of personality types. There is a Buddhist list of personality types, which you find in the Visuddhimagga, which is broken down either into 3 or 6 different spectrum range of characters. That's like, you have greed types, you have hate types, and you've got delusion types. And then there's an extra 3, which are slightly less clear, which are the kind of intellectual type, the faith type, and the, do you remember, Nisabho?
I know that there's like equanimity or delusion teams seems to mature into spaciousness. I've heard something like that. Equanimity, greed into faith, aversion into wisdom, but I don't know if that's what you're referencing.
Yeah, no, yeah, but basically it's a different way of looking at personality types, which you find in the Visuddhimagga, which was written about 500 AD. So this is not a Buddhist list, this big 5. But to understand them, yeah, you can just look around you, and it's fascinating. I mean, if you consider the Satipatthana Sutta, you know, there's what Bhante Nalio calls the refrain, which comes up at the end of every single section, not just at the end of the section on body, feelings, mind, and dhammas, but after all of the exercises within that. So after the reflection on the breath, or the body parts, or the postures, or clear comprehension, or the charnel ground meditations, you've got this refrain which says, so one pays attention to the body internally, or one pays attention to the body in and of itself externally, or one pays attention to the body in and of itself both internally and externally. And this is how you can study these 5 personality traits, maybe more on the level of mind, knowing Chittanupassana. So yeah, you know and you study the mind in and of itself internally. So these are my big 5. This is how I kind of score on these big 5 things. And I don't take it as a self. That's what this in and of itself. So I know the mind in and of itself. There is this, yeah, there's a degree of conscientiousness. There's a degree of extroversion and introversion, a degree of neuroticism. And I take all these things as phenomenon which have causes. And if they're unwholesome, like the neuroticism end of the spectrum, then I know how to, and practice, and know how to get rid of those. And then externally, you can see this in other people. It's amazing. I mean, although this big 5 didn't exist at the time of the Buddha, if it had, he would have been, anyone, you know, would have been able to see these exact same things. I mean, as Tom Nisabho pointed out at the beginning, you have these great disciples, you know, who, you know, Revata, who's foremost in wilderness dwelling, you know, that's not an extrovert. You know, you've got, yeah, all sorts of different examples of these different types. So they've existed since the time of the Buddha, and chances are they'll continue existing because we've all got these minds. So
And
yeah, just paying attention.
and just to put out there that Ajahn Kovilo and I, like, we enjoy sort of, there's a lot to be gained from bringing in these other paradigms to the Dhamma and having a dialogue around that. But we're holding these big 5 lightly. It's not, you know, we're bringing it in as a brief contemplation, but this is not something that, you know, is central to our practice in the way of, yeah, it's not something we're recommending as these like things to contemplate exclusively around or anything like that. It's really interesting subject to sort of speak about, and it allows you to see new angles into the Dhamma. So, but just to say that, yeah, this is, you know, a fun sort of adventure for a talk and discussion more than anything. One question from Angela is, I was trying to explain not self to someone, but ran into some difficulty when they said, what if we accept that the self is changing? If personality and the self are dynamic, then can they exist? Ajahn, do you want to speak to that? I can give it a go as well, but okay.
Please.
So it's a good question. The whole concept of self is an unexamined term, and it's tied up with so much. When the Buddha was really looking at what that meant, he tied it very explicitly to the sense of control, comparing when he was sort of dismantling certain people challenging him about the self in regards to the aggregates, the focus that we take as self frequently, such as the body, consciousness, perception, uh, sankhara, sort of formations, and feeling. He said, look, can you control all these? Can you tell your body to be this way or that way? Or your perception to be this way or that way? And if a king ruled a kingdom but could not control that kingdom at all, would that be his kingdom? And the answer was no. And so can you really call any of these changing things a self if you can't control them? And the answer was no. And so what the self means in the Buddhist context, in some cases at least, is that it's associated with control. And rather than the Buddha's teachings have been misinterpreted in some ways with translation into a teaching of no self as an ontological truth. But the Buddha didn't teach that. When he was asked very directly if there was a self or not a self, he refused to answer. What he taught was not self strategy. So he said, look at these things that you cling to as a self, your body, your perceptions, your personality programs or formations, your feelings, your consciousness. Can you control these? Do they change? Are they worthy of being called a self? And as you contemplate that, especially with the calm mind of samadhi, then your heart intuits that they're not worthy of being called a self, and it lets go little by little and of that. And the idea was that when you let go of all those things that you falsely tried to cling to as a self, then you come to something else, nibbana eventually. And as to what that was, it can't be defined as self or not self. So it's beyond words, and the Buddha didn't see a need to go there in terms of really explicitly defining it as this or that. What the other thing you could speak about in terms of your question is that people frequently ask, if there's no self, what does karma happen to? But that's taking it backwards. It's putting self in the context of karma in the context of self, whereas the Buddha situated self in the context of karma. So we do have this continuity of habit and karma, and it is changing. Like you said, these personality traits are changing. So your friend, in saying that the self is changing, can that be considered a self? Maybe you could say in the Buddhist framework, you could say there is continuity of karma, and that is changing. And one of those elements of karma, one of those habits, is the act of creating a conception of self. That's so self is occurring as a habit pattern within karma. And so this sort of feeling of self, this intuition of self, is a habit, is a piece of karma that just forms. So there is continuity of experience, but in terms of the ultimate truth, the Buddha didn't see a necessity in terms to define that in terms of what we come to when we let go of those formations. Ajahn?
Do we have time for another question?
I don't know. I think maybe we should wrap it up, but it's totally up to you. I'd be happy to hear you speak on one more, Ajahn, personally. No, I like hearing you talk. Please give it a go. I would be grateful.
Okay. Great. So here's, I guess this would be the final question for the evening, but we have Dave Tatro saying, for those who seem proud of a self-righteously angry personality, besides including them in our metta practice, are there other ways to actively help them break free without alienating them? Yeah, I mean, metta, I think, is definitely the basis for how we can relate to them. There's a number of discourses where the Buddha talks about radiating metta for people in public and in private, to their face and when you're alone. So you can do this practice of metta for this person even if you're not around them. And yeah, it can be sticky if you can relate to them with a sense of humor. If they have a sense of humor and you can laugh at their foibles, then that can really go a long way to soften things up. Like oftentimes, I mean, I'm friends with, you know,
What, Ajahn?
I'm friends with all sorts of people. I'm friends with all sorts of people, and yeah, really, like a lot of people who come across as being disagreeable. It's some of it is just their sense of humor. It's just they they have very discerning eyes. This is how, um, yeah, anger and hatred can, uh, fuel itself, is because oftentimes the things that people are angry about is from seeing things that are true. They're seeing things that are accurate, and they, just become angry from a misholding of that truth, feeling like this is true, which oftentimes, you know, the object of the anger is true, but then taking it to the next level of, and it shouldn't be this way, and I'm right and they're wrong type, dichotomy. But yeah, if you can find out a way to laugh with them, and to that can really at least help your relationship with them, and not taking them so seriously. Um, yeah, it's actually the rare angry person who doesn't have a sense of humor. Oftentimes, their sense of humor is often just quite different from, a more agreeable sense of humor. So that's my take on it. But oftentimes, because they have such clear, incisional, very pointed sight of things, they're oftentimes very funny, because they see things which we don't. They see the flaws, and so yeah, laughing with people is a great way to let some steam off. So
Sadhu, Ajahn. So yeah, we're gonna I think
sadhu.
we've hit about an hour, and it was quite nice to see everyone. We'll be streaming onto Buddhist Insights and our own channel every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and as well as Monday evenings at 6:30 this time. And also, first Friday of every month, we're going to have a dual monk chat with Ayasoma, Bhante Sudaso, and the Buddhist Insights crew, which will be really fun, like this, but with even more monks and nuns or bhikkhunis. And we'll have that the first Friday of every month at 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time. And just to say, it was really nice to sort of tap into this whole community, and we're grateful to be a part of it in general. Ajahn, any closing words around that?
No, that was great. It's great to see so many people here, and look forward to meeting people in person. Hopefully someday this coronavirus, the whole pandemic, will end, and we'll be able to meet each other in person, and that'll be great, because we're meeting each other via digital means now. But
And Ajahn, you'll be heading over to Empty Cloud pretty soon as well, right?
that's right, June 13th. I'll be there for 3 weeks, and then I'll be with Bhikkhu Bodhi for the month of July and into August. So.
Cool. All right, it was great talking to you, Ajahn. It was good seeing everyone.
Yeah.
Ajahn.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.